From World War I to the modern Abrams, US tanks evolved through necessity, combat losses, and redesign. This timeline shows every true tank family and explains how battlefield experience shaped American armored warfare. Starting with World War I. Ford 3-ton tank. Built in 1918 as an emergency light tank, the Ford 3-ton was designed for infantry support with minimal armor and armament. Equipped only with machine guns, and reaching about 13 kilometers per hour, it struggled with poor mobility and mechanical reliability. Its battlefield use was extremely limited, but it represents the first US effort to design and produce a domestically built tank under wartime pressure. M1917 light tank. Derived from the French Renault FT, the M1917 became the first mass-produced American tank. Armed with a 37mm gun and moving at roughly 8 km per hour, it was intended for direct infantry support. Although it arrived too late for World War I combat, all variants were visually identical, with differences limited to internal fittings or weapon configuration rather than external design. Mark VIII Liberty. Liberty was a heavy breakthrough tank developed jointly by the United States and Britain. Armed with 57mm guns and protected by thick armor, it reached speeds of about 8 km per hour. Designed to cross trenches and absorb machine gun fire, it required large crews and heavy logistical support. It had no visually distinct production variants during its limited service life. Next up, interwar development. M1 combat car. Developed during the interwar period under cavalry doctrine, the M1 combat car avoided the tank designation by name only. Lightly armored and armed with machine guns, it emphasized speed and mobility, reaching up to 72 km per hour. All versions were visually identical, with differences limited to mechanical components and internal layout. M2 light tank. The M2 light tank was an interwar design armed with a 37mm gun and capable of speeds around 58 km per hour. Intended for reconnaissance and infantry support, it proved under-armored by the time the US entered World War II. It never saw frontline combat. All M2 variants were visually identical, with differences limited to armor thickness and internal components rather than hull or turret shape. M2 medium tank. The M2 medium tank represented the US Army's first attempt at a modern medium tank before World War II. Armed with a 37mm gun and multiple machine guns, it reached about 42 km per hour. Its tall silhouette and weak armor made it obsolete by 1941. Variants showed no major external differences and shared the same hull and turret design. Moving into World War II. M3 Stuart. Stuart was a fast light tank designed for reconnaissance and infantry support. Armed with a 37mm gun and capable of approximately 58 km per hour, it performed effectively early in World War II. The M3 and M3A1 were visually identical, with changes limited to internal systems. The M3A3 introduced a visibly redesigned hull with sloped armor, making it the only visually distinct Stuart variant. M5 Stuart. The M5 Stuart replaced the M3 with a visibly different hull, engine deck, and rear profile, making it a separate tank family. Still armed with a 37mm gun, it reached speeds near 58 km per hour. Although firepower remained limited, improved reliability and a lower silhouette enhanced survivability. It served effectively in reconnaissance and light combat roles throughout World War II. M22 Locust. Designed for airborne forces, the M22 Locust was an extremely light tank armed with a 37mm gun and capable of about 64 km per hour. Its thin armor and small size limited battlefield survivability. Combat use was minimal, but it represented a unique attempt to provide armored support to airborne troops. It had no visually distinct production variants. M24 Chaffee. Chaffee replaced earlier light tanks with improved firepower and mobility. Armed with a 75mm gun and reaching about 56 km per hour, it offered a better balance between speed and combat capability. Entering service late in World War II, it performed well in reconnaissance and light combat. All variants were visually identical, with no major external redesigns. M3 Lee. Lee was a stopgap medium tank armed with a 75mm hull-mounted gun and a 37mm turret gun, reaching speeds of about 42 kilometers per hour. Its high-profile and limited gun traverse reduced survivability. The British Grant version used a different turret shape but retained the same hull and layout, making both visually similar members of the same tank family. M4 Sherman. The M4 Sherman became the backbone of US armoured forces during World War II. Armed with 75mm or 76mm guns and capable of about 48 kilometers per hour, it emphasized reliability and mass production. Variants such as M4A1, M4A2, and M4A3 differed mainly in engines and internal systems. Only suspension and armour thickness changed externally, keeping the core visual design consistent. M26 Pershing. Introduced late in World War II, the M26 Pershing was armed with a powerful 90mm gun and reached speeds near 40 kilometers per hour. Designed to counter German heavy tanks, it featured a new hull and turret, making it visually distinct from the Sherman. Combat performance proved effective, and it marked the transition toward post-war main battle tank concepts. Shifting into Korea and early Cold War. M46 Patton. Patton was developed from the Pershing but featured a revised engine deck, improved suspension, and a redesigned rear hull, making it visually distinct. Armed with a 90mm gun and reaching about 48 kilometers per hour, it saw combat in Korea. It delivered reliable fire support and better mobility than its predecessor, restoring confidence in US armoured forces during early Cold War combat operations. M47 Patton. Designed rapidly for Cold War deployment, the M47 Patton introduced a new turret and fire control layout while retaining a 90mm gun. With a top speed near 60 kilometers per hour, it was visually distinct from the M46. Although its service with US forces was short, it filled an urgent strategic gap and was widely used by NATO allies during the early Cold War period. M48 Patton. Patton featured a completely new rounded hull and domed turret, clearly separating it visually from earlier Patton tanks. Armed with a 90mm gun and capable of about 48 kilometers per hour, it served extensively during the Cold War and saw combat in Vietnam. Improved armour protection and survivability made it one of the most successful US tank designs of its era. Continuing with Cold War specialised designs. M41 Walker Bulldog. Walker Bulldog was a fast reconnaissance light tank armed with a 76mm gun and capable of speeds up to 72 kilometers per hour. Designed for mobility and rapid response, it sacrificed armour protection for speed. It was visually unique and widely used during the Cold War for scouting and screening roles, performing effectively where manoeuvrability mattered more than survivability. M103 Heavy Tank. The M103 was the last US heavy tank designed to counter Soviet heavy armour. Armed with a massive 120mm gun and reaching only about 34 kilometers per hour, it required large crews and extensive logistical support. Its size and complexity limited service life, but it was visually distinct and marked the end of the American heavy tank concept. Entering the main battle tank era, M60 Patton. Patton introduced a new hull front and a 105mm gun, making it visually distinct from earlier Pattons. Capable of about 48 kilometers per hour, it became the primary US main battle tank during the Cold War. Later variants shared the same silhouette, with changes limited mostly to internal systems, allowing the M60 family to remain operational for decades. M551 Sheridan. Sheridan was a lightweight air-deployable tank built with an aluminum hull and armed with a unique 152mm gun launcher system. Reaching speeds near 70 kilometers per hour, it was visually unlike any other US tank. Used in Vietnam and later conflicts, it offered powerful fire support but suffered from thin armor and reliability issues in combat. Finally, the modern era. M1 Abrams. Abrams introduced a radically new design with composite armor, a low-profile turret, and advanced fire control systems. Initially armed with a 105mm gun and later upgraded to 120mm, it reached speeds near 67 kilometers per hour. All Abrams variants share the same core visual design, with later upgrades focused mainly on internal systems rather than external appearance. This concludes the evolution of US tanks from World War I to the Abrams. Each design reflects real combat demands, showing how experience, loss, and adaptation shaped American armored warfare over more than a century.